The thermometer outside James Harper's mountain cabin showed 50 degrees below zero, a temperature he hadn't seen since his military tours in the harshest regions of Afghanistan. In his 3 years living in this remote corner of Montana's Bitterroot, mountains, even the most severe winters, hadn't prepared him for what was coming. The approaching Arctic blast wasn't just another winter storm, it was the kind of weather system that made even combat-hardened veterans question their choice of solitude. Nestled deep in the wilderness, where the nearest town was a treacherous 5-hour drive away, his self-built cabin stood as a solitary outpost against nature's raw power. The sturdy log structure, reinforced with techniques he'd learned during his Special Forces training, had been his sanctuary since choosing to leave his chaotic life in Chicago behind. Tonight, as the wind howled through the ancient pines with increasing ferocity, his decision to live off-grid would face its greatest test. The January morning had begun like any other in James's carefully structured routine. He woke at precisely 0500 hours, a habit ingrained from 15 years of military service, to the familiar sound of his wood stove's dying embers. The warmth barely reached the furthest corners of his living space, and through the frost-covered windows he could see that fresh snow had fallen overnight, adding another thick layer to the already impressive drifts surrounding his property. At 42 years old, the former Green Beret had developed a disciplined approach to survival in these harsh conditions. His military training had taught him that survival wasn't just about physical preparation. It was about maintaining order and routine, even in the most challenging circumstances. Every morning began with a methodical check of his equipment, weather conditions, and supplies. His cabin, though modest, was equipped with military-grade survival gear and enough provisions to last through extended periods of isolation. The walls of his cabin told the story of his journey. Instead of family photos, topographical maps and tactical gear hung alongside the few mementos from his service days. His Medal of Valor sat in a simple wooden box on the mantel, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. The satellite phone, his only connection to the outside world, remained charged and ready, though he rarely used it except for monthly check-ins with his former commanding officer. The weather report that morning had set off every alarm bell in James's veteran instincts. The incoming storm system was unlike anything the region had seen in decades. The National Weather Service was predicting temperatures to plummet to historic lows, with winds strong enough to snap the strongest pines like matchsticks. His experience in high-altitude operations had taught him that these were the kind of conditions that could trap someone indefinitely, turning a comfortable shelter into a frozen tomb within hours. James spent the morning securing his equipment with military precision. The generator was checked and double-checked, backup systems were tested, and emergency protocols were reviewed. The routine was ingrained in his muscle memory, but his combat experience had taught him that complacency was a killer. The words of his first drill sergeant echoed in his mind. "Precision keeps you alive when everything else fails, soldier." Those words had saved his life in countless firefights, and now they guided his survival in the wilderness. As afternoon approached, the first wave of the Arctic blast hit with unexpected force. The snow didn't fall. It drove horizontally, reducing visibility to arm's length beyond his reinforced porch. James moved with practiced efficiency, implementing his severe weather protocols. He filled multiple containers with water, knowing His pipes could freeze despite the military-grade insulation he'd installed. He stacked additional firewood inside according to his precise organizational system, each log placed for maximum efficiency. Living alone in such extreme conditions had amplified rather than diminished James's hypervigilance, a trait that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty. The constant awareness of his environment, ingrained through years of special operations training, had evolved to include nature's subtle warnings. He'd learned to interpret the way the mountain air pressure changed before a severe storm, how the local wildlife altered their behavior hours before dangerous weather arrived, and the particular quality of silence that preceded truly life-threatening conditions. His emergency radio crackled with updated warnings as the day progressed. The storm was intensifying faster than predicted, driving temperatures down at a rate that concerned even the most experienced meteorologists. James maintained his composure, falling back on his military training. Assess, adapt, overcome. He knew that panic was as deadly as any external threat, whether in combat or wilderness survival. The wind found every microscopic gap in his cabin's defenses, creating an eerie whistling that reminded him of the mountain passes in the Hindu Kush. He prepared a sparse dinner of military rations, conserving his fresh supplies for what his instincts told him would be an extended period of isolation. His movements were deliberate and measured, each action part of a larger survival strategy. What happened next would force James to confront not just the brutal forces of nature, but the very principles of survival he'd lived by since his first day of basic training. As the night drew closer, he would face a decision that would challenge everything he'd learned about survival, both in combat and in the wilderness. The first indication that something was wrong came just after 2,300 hours, when his finely tuned senses picked up an unusual sound through the howling wind. Through years of special operations experience, James had learned to trust his instincts. Implicitly, the sound he heard wasn't just the storm, it was something else, something that triggered the same alertness he'd relied on in combat zones. He moved to his observation position near the reinforced window, his movements silent despite the creaking cabin. The thermometer now showed 55 below zero, and the wind chill made it feel even more lethal. Through his military-grade night vision scope, James scanned the perimeter of his cabin. The green-tinted view showed a world transformed into a deadly wasteland of driving snow and ice. Then he saw them, 4 dark shapes moving through the whiteout conditions, their forms barely distinguishable against the snow-swept landscape. A mother bear and 3 cubs, their movements labored and desperate in the devastating cold. Even through his years of combat experience and wilderness survival, the sight stopped him cold. Bears should be deep in hibernation during January. Their presence in these conditions meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. His training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify the threat level, evaluate options. Through his scope, he could see the bears were in severe distress. The mother's powerful frame moved with the telltale sluggishness of hypothermia, while her 3 cubs huddled against her, their small bodies fighting a losing battle against the brutal cold. Years of combat experience had taught James to read signs of distress in any living creature, and what he saw sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. The family of bears made their way closer to his cabin, clearly seeking any shelter from the merciless storm. Through his scope, James could see ice forming on their fur, their movements becoming more uncoordinated with each passing minute. The mother bear's stability was failing, her massive frame swaying as she tried to shield her cubs from the worst of the wind. The smallest cub stumbled, collapsing into the deep snow. The mother's attempts to help it up were weak, her own strength clearly failing. Through his scope, James observed the bear's deteriorating condition with the same analytical precision he'd used to assess battlefield situations. The temperature continued its merciless descent, his digital thermometer now flashing an error message. The cold had exceeded its measurement capabilities. The wind grew stronger, and he could see the mother bear attempting to create a snow shelter, but the relentless gusts destroyed any progress she made within seconds. The smallest cub collapsed again, its movements becoming alarmingly sluggish. The mother bear's efforts to rouse it grew weaker, her own reserves depleting rapidly in the lethal conditions. The other two cubs pressed against their mother's sides, their shivering visible even through the thick curtain of snow. Time was running out. James had seen enough hypothermia cases in the mountains of Afghanistan to recognize the signs of imminent system failure. For over an hour, the bears had been fighting their losing battle against the elements. The second, largest cub stumbled and fell, taking longer to regain its footing than its sibling had earlier. The mother's attempts to help became increasingly uncoordinated, her massive frame swaying dangerously as she tried to protect her offspring. She released a low, resonant moan that cut through the howling wind, a sound that struck something deep in James's combat-hardened core. His military training had taught him to maintain emotional distance when assessing critical situations, but watching these magnificent creatures succumb to the cold stirred something he thought he'd left behind in the war zones. The bears had now huddled directly against his reinforced porch, their last desperate attempt to find shelter from the Arctic blast. The cubs' movements had become dangerously infrequent, and the mother's eyes were glazing over as hypothermia tightened its grip on her massive body. Through his scope, James could see their shivers becoming less frequent, a critical warning sign he'd learned to watch for during high-altitude operations. His hand rested on the cabin's steel door handle as his mind raced through combat-honed risk assessment protocols. Every survival manual, every military guideline, every lesson learned in the wilderness screamed at him to maintain his secure position. But as he watched the family of bears slowly freezing to death on his porch, another voice emerged, one that spoke of duty and honor beyond mere survival. The bears had almost stopped moving altogether now. The three cubs lay motionless against their mother, who had positioned herself between them and the worst of the wind. Her eyes met James's through his observation window, and in that moment, his Special Forces training identified something he'd seen before, not the wild fury of a predator, but the desperate resignation of a mother facing the inevitable loss of her children. Time crystallized as James stood with his hand on the door handle, every combat instinct firing simultaneously. His mind flashed back to a mission in the Hindu Kush, where his unit had found a local family trapped in a high-altitude blizzard. The decision to help them had violated tactical protocols, but had earned him his Medal of Valor. Now, years later, he faced another moment where military doctrine collided with moral imperative. The wind assaulted his cabin with renewed violence, and the bears had stopped shivering entirely. James's medical training from the Special Forces screamed at him that this was the final stage before terminal hypothermia. The cubs were shutting down, their small bodies surrendering to the cold, while their mother's breathing became shallow and labored, her massive form barely rising and falling beneath the accumulating snow. His emergency radio crackled with an updated forecast. The storm was intensifying beyond all predictions, with at least another 18 hours before any possibility of improvement. The bears would not survive another hour, let alone the night. Ice had formed thick crusts on their fur, and their breathing patterns showed the telltale irregularity of severe hypothermia. James's mind raced through options with the same tactical precision he'd used in combat planning. His equipment storage room, reinforced with military-grade materials, could serve as temporary shelter. It was separate from his living space with its own entrance and maintained above freezing temperatures thanks to his backup heating system. But the logistics of moving 3 hypothermic bears into it seemed impossible, and the risks were enormous. If the mother bear panicked, she could destroy his survival shelter, leaving them all to freeze in the Arctic blast. If she attacked, his satellite phone would be useless in these conditions. Help would never arrive in time. Even if they survived the night, having 3 bears this close to his living space violated every principle of wilderness safety he'd learned since leaving the service. His sniper scope sat unused on his tactical gear shelf. For years, he'd observed wildlife from a safe distance, applying the same discipline he'd learned as a Special Forces operator: maintain separation, avoid engagement, survive. But as he watched the cubs growing still, their small forms disappearing under the thickening layer of snow, everything he'd learned about survival seemed inadequate against the raw reality before him. The mother bear's gaze never wavered from his position. In her eyes, James recognized something he'd seen in the faces of civilians caught in combat zones: a desperate hope that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Her usual fear of humans seemed to have been overwhelmed by maternal instinct and the absolute certainty of death without intervention. A massive pine branch shattered under the weight of ice nearby, the sound like a rifle shot in the darkness. The bears barely twitched at the noise, their lethargy reaching critical levels. The mother bear attempted to nuzzle her smallest cub, but her movements were uncoordinated and weak. Within minutes, she would be too exhausted to move at all. James began removing his tactical winter gear, his movements precise and practiced. If he was going to attempt this rescue, he would need maximum mobility. He pulled on his cold-weather combat gloves and retrieved the military-grade thermal blankets from his emergency supplies. His hands moved with the steady precision he'd developed through years of handling weapons in combat situations. He checked his satellite phone one final time, knowing it was a futile gesture. In these conditions, even military-grade communications would be worthless. The consequences of his next action would be absolute and irreversible. Opening that door would violate every tactical principle he'd lived by, contradicting his training, experience, and the core tenets of wilderness survival. As his hand rested on the door handle, the words of his commanding officer echoed in his mind. Sometimes, soldier, the riskiest course of action is the only honorable one. He watched another shuddering breath leave the mother bear's massive body and realized that survival sometimes required more than following protocols and procedures. The line between tactical wisdom and moral courage had never been thinner. The cubs had ceased all movement now, only the slightest rise and fall of their chests indicating they still lived. The mother bear's eyes were beginning to close, her enormous body slowly collapsing into the deepening snow. The lethal cold was winning its battle against even her tremendous strength. In a few more minutes, the point of no return would pass, and nature would take its course. James took a deep combat breath and began his final preparations with military precision. He activated all backup heating systems in the storage room, creating maximum warmth in the potential shelter. He positioned the thermal blankets near the door, where he could reach them with a single movement, his hands steady now as mission. Focus replaced uncertainty. The mother bear tracked his movements through the window, her gaze following him with an intelligence that seemed to transcend species barriers. Through his observation window, he could see the bear family's dark forms, growing fainter under the accumulating snow. The next few moments would either mark the bravest decision of his life or his last tactical error. The digital clock on his radio showed 0200 hours, the deadliest time of night when the cold reached its brutal peak. Everything he'd learned about bears, about survival, about tactical response to wildlife encounters was about to be tested against his deepest instincts. James grasped the door handle firmly, centering himself as he'd done before countless high-risk operations. The reinforced door opened with a metallic groan that pierced the frozen night. Arctic air immediately invaded his cabin, bringing with it a blast of snow and bitter cold that stung his exposed face. The bears lay just feet away, their bodies now half buried in the mounting snowdrifts. Moving with the deliberate grace of a seasoned operator, James stepped onto his porch. The mother bear's eyes flickered at his movement, registering his presence, but she made no aggressive response. Her survival instinct appeared to be battling with total exhaustion. She lifted her head slightly, nostrils flaring as she processed his scent. But even this small movement seemed to drain her remaining energy reserves. Speaking in the same low, steady tone he'd used to calm civilians in combat zones, James began clearing a path from his porch to the storage room door. Every movement was measured and non-threatening, calculated to avoid triggering the bear's defensive instincts. "Easy now," he found himself whispering, though he knew the bears couldn't comprehend his words. The mother bear watched him, her eyes showing more alertness now, but still no aggression. The cubs remained motionless, their small bodies almost completely buried in the snow. James could barely detect their breathing in the harsh wind. In these lethal conditions, even these few minutes of exposure were dangerous for him, despite his cold-weather tactical gear. He had to act immediately or abandon the attempt entirely. Time was his enemy now, just as it had been in combat, with hands steady. As they'd been behind a sniper scope, James opened the storage room door wide. Warm air rushed out, creating a momentary fog in the Arctic night. The mother bear's head lifted higher, her nostrils working as she detected the heat, the most movement she'd shown in the past hour. James's heart pounded with the same controlled intensity he'd known in firefights as he took the most dangerous step of all. He moved closer to the bears, thermal blankets in his hands. The mother bear's eyes tracked his movement, but her usual protective instincts seemed overwhelmed by cold and exhaustion. When he was within striking distance, he gently tossed one of the blankets over the cubs. The military-grade wool covered their small bodies, and for a terrifying moment, the mother bear tensed. James held his position, knowing his life balanced. On her next reaction, instead of attacking, she slowly, painfully began to nose the blanket around her cubs, appearing to understand its purpose. Encouraged by her response, James spread another blanket closer to the storage room door, creating a path of warmth. His fingers were beginning to lose sensation despite his tactical gloves, and he knew his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Everything now depended on the mother bear's next decision. She attempted to stand, her powerful legs trembling with the effort. The cubs remained motionless under the blanket. With movements that belied her massive size, she tried to nudge one of the cubs. It didn't respond. The second and third cubs lay equally still. A sound of distress rumbled from her throat, a mother's fear that transcended species. James made his final tactical movement, stepping back with the same careful precision he'd used approaching enemy positions. He maintained his deliberate pace until he stood near the storage room door, where warm air continued flowing out like a beacon in the darkness. He waited, his heart rate controlled as it had been behind a trigger, while the mother bear faced her own critical decision. The massive creature gathered her remaining strength. With agonizing slowness, she managed to get to her feet. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she stood swaying in the savage wind, her gaze moving between her cubs and the open door. Then, with infinite gentleness, she gripped the blanket covering her cubs in her teeth. James watched in awe as the mother bear, fighting exhaustion with every step, began to drag her 3 cubs toward the storage room door. The thermal blanket helped them slide over the snow, but every movement clearly drained her precious energy. Her powerful muscles trembled with the effort, but her maternal instinct drove her forward. The distance was only a few yards, but it might as well have been miles. James maintained his position, barely breathing, as the bear family inched toward safety. The wind grew stronger, nearly knocking him off balance, but the mother bear pressed on, refusing to release her grip on the blanket that held her precious cargo. Finally, incredibly, they reached the threshold. The mother bear paused, her massive form blocking the entrance as steam rose from her fur where the warm air met it. This was the moment of greatest tactical danger. If she panicked now in such close quarters, there would be no escape, but the bitter cold and her cubs' desperate need overcame her natural fear. With the last of her strength, she pulled her cubs over the threshold and into the warm room. James watched as the massive creature collapsed beside her children, her body curling protectively around them as warmth began to seep back into their frozen bodies. With the same careful precision he'd used throughout the operation, he closed the storage room door. Through the small, reinforced window, he could see the bear family huddled together in the warm space. The mother bear's eyes remained open, watching him, but the desperate tension in her body had begun to ease as the heat worked through her frozen fur. Over the next several hours, James maintained his vigil from his cabin, observing through the connecting window between his living space and the storage room. The storm outside reached its peak, battering the walls of his cabin with unprecedented fury. But inside the storage room, a miracle was unfolding. The cubs were the first to show signs of recovery. As their small bodies warmed, they began to stir. Their movements were weak initially, barely perceptible, but gradually grew stronger. The mother bear, despite her own exhaustion, tenderly nuzzled each cub, encouraging them back to life. She never took her eyes off the window where James maintained his watch, but the look in them had transformed from desperate resignation to something that reminded him of the grateful civilians he'd helped evacuate from combat zones. The smallest cub, which had been the first to collapse in the storm, was now moving with increasing strength, its survival instinct rekindling in the warmth. By dawn, all three cubs were awake and mobile, their natural curiosity returning as they explored their temporary shelter. They stayed close to their mother, but their movements grew more playful with each passing hour. The mother bear remained alert but calm, seeming to understand that this unusual situation was their salvation. Her behavior reminded James of the adaptability he'd witnessed in war zones, where survival often meant trusting unlikely allies. The storm raged for 3 more days, during which time James carefully placed water and food near the storage room. When the bears were sleeping, the mother bear accepted these offerings, her initial wariness giving way to a cautious acceptance of his presence. He noticed how she would wait until he moved away before eating or drinking, maintaining a delicate balance between necessity and wild instinct, a behavior that reminded him of helping local populations in conflict zones. James observed their recovery with the same attention to detail he'd used tracking enemy movements. The cubs grew stronger each day, their playful activities increasing as they regained their energy. The smallest cub, in particular, showed remarkable resilience, bouncing back from its near-death experience with the vigor of youth. The mother bear watched their play with obvious relief, though she never fully relaxed her vigilant guard. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The world outside had been transformed into a crystalline landscape of snow and ice, but the temperature had begun to rise above the lethal levels of the past few days. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in nearly a week, bringing with it the promise of survival. James knew it was time. The bears needed to return to the wild before they became too accustomed to human presence. As if sensing this shift, the mother bear had grown more restless, her natural instincts calling her back to the forest. The cubs, now fully recovered, were becoming more active, testing their renewed strength against each other in playful scuffles that brought a smile to James's weathered face. He recognized in their behavior the same restless energy he'd felt when recovering from combat injuries, the urge to return to one's natural environment. With the same methodical approach he'd used throughout this extraordinary encounter, James prepared for their departure. He chose his timing carefully, waiting for the warmest part of the day when the sun had softened the snow and the wind had died down. Using the same careful movements that had served him in combat situations, he approached the storage room's outer door. The mother bear lifted her head as he neared, scenting his presence with renewed alertness. Her cubs gathered close to her, their previous playfulness replaced by watchful attention. James spoke softly as he had done throughout their stay, maintaining the calm atmosphere that had defined their unusual coexistence. With deliberate slowness, he opened the outer door. Fresh air and sunlight streamed into the storage room, carrying with it the scent of the forest. The mother bear rose to her feet, magnificent and powerful once again, so different from the desperate creature she had been 4 nights ago. Her fur had dried and fluffed out, returning to its natural splendor. The cubs followed their mother's lead, their small bodies now moving with the energy and coordination of healthy young bears. At the doorway, the mother bear paused. She turned her massive head toward James, who stood at a respectful distance, and their eyes met one final time. In that moment, he felt he understood something profound about the connection between all living things. The same understanding he'd gained working with local tribes in the mountains of Afghanistan, where survival often depended on looking past surface differences to recognize shared humanity. Then, with surprising grace for such a large animal, she led her cubs out into the snow. James watched as they made their way into the forest, their dark forms growing smaller against the white landscape. The cubs bounded through the snow, their near-death experience already forgotten in the way of young animals. Their mother followed more slowly, her powerful form silhouetted against the morning sun. Just before they disappeared into the trees, the mother bear stopped and looked back one final time. She stood there for a long moment, her presence commanding, even at a distance, then turned and vanished into the forest with her cubs, leaving only tracks in the snow as evidence of their extraordinary encounter. The sight reminded James of the many goodbyes he'd said in war zones, where circumstances had created unexpected bonds that transcended normal boundaries. James stood at his window long after they had gone, reflecting on the experience. He had broken every rule of wilderness safety, risked his life on an instinct he couldn't fully explain. Yet as he watched the sun rise over the transformed landscape, he knew he would make the same choice again. The decision reminded him of the many times in combat where following his heart rather than his training had led to saved lives. In the years that followed, he would sometimes see bears in the distance and wonder if they were the same family he had sheltered that desperate night. But he never attempted to get close or track them. Some memories, he had learned, were better preserved in the heart than through observation. His decision to open that door had taught him that sometimes survival meant more than just staying alive. Sometimes it meant remembering our shared connection to all living things, even in the harshest circumstances. The experience changed something in James. The same precision and discipline that had served him in special forces now took on a new dimension. His survival skills, honed in combat, had helped save lives in an unexpected way. The incident reminded him that the true measure of a warrior wasn't just in their ability to fight, but in their capacity for compassion, even in the most challenging circumstances. Spring came early that year, melting away the last traces of the historic storm. As the landscape transformed, James found himself watching the tree line more often, alert for any sign of his unusual guests. While he never saw that specific family again, he noticed other changes in himself. The hypervigilance that had once been purely about survival now included a deeper awareness of the wildlife around his cabin. He began keeping a journal of his wildlife observations, something he'd never done before. His military precision found new expression in detailed notes about animal behavior and weather patterns. The same skills that had made him an excellent Special Forces operator now made him an astute observer of nature. He found a different kind of peace in this new mission, not just surviving in the wilderness, but understanding and protecting it. The story of that night spread through the nearby towns, passed along by the few people James stayed in contact with. Some dismissed it as impossible, others saw it as reckless, but those who knew him best understood. They recognized in his actions the same courage and compassion that had earned him his military honors. His former commanding officer during their monthly check-in had simply said, "Some battles are won with the heart, soldier." As the story of James's encounter with the bear family spread, it began to change how local residents viewed both the veteran and the wildlife they shared their mountains with. The incident had demonstrated that survival in the wilderness wasn't just about maintaining separation between humans and animals. Sometimes it meant recognizing moments when compassion outweighed caution. Park rangers who initially criticized his decision grew quiet when they saw his detailed journals documenting the event and its aftermath. James's military training had taught him the importance of learning from every experience, and he approached this one no differently. He began adapting his cabin and storage room, installing better heating systems and creating emergency protocols that accounted for wildlife in distress. His tactical mindset, previously focused solely on personal survival, expanded to consider the broader ecosystem he'd chosen to call home. The following winter brought more stories of unusual wildlife behavior as climate patterns continued to shift. James found himself consulted by local authorities about animal encounters. His unique combination of military precision and compassionate understanding proving valuable in situations where humans and wildlife came into conflict. His experience that night had given him a perspective that bridged two worlds: the tactical awareness of a Special Forces veteran and the deep empathy of someone who'd witnessed nature's vulnerability. Other veterans in the region sought him, outdrawn by the story of that night. Many of them, like James, had sought solitude in the wilderness as a way to process their combat experiences. In their conversations around his fireplace, they found a new way to think about their military training. The same skills that had kept them alive in combat zones could be adapted to protect and preserve life in all its forms. The smallest of the three cubs had left a particular impression on James. Its remarkable recovery from the brink of death reminded him of the resilience he'd witnessed in war zones, the incredible will to live that could overcome seemingly impossible odds. He often thought about that tiny bear, wondering if it had grown into a strong adult, carrying within it some memory of the night humans had chosen to help rather than harm. During spring melt, James discovered signs that his bear family had survived the rest of winter. Their tracks, distinctive due to the smallest cub's slightly different gait, led to a den several miles from his cabin. He never approached the den, respecting their wild nature, but the knowledge of their survival brought him a deep satisfaction. It validated his decision that desperate night and reinforced his belief in the importance of trusting one's instincts, even when they contradicted established protocols. The experience changed how James approached his isolation. While he maintained his discipline and tactical awareness, he began to see his role in the wilderness differently. He wasn't just a solitary survivor, but part of a larger community of living beings. His military training, which had taught him to see everything as either threat or ally, evolved into a more nuanced understanding of the natural world. He started working with wildlife biologists who studied the region's bear populations. His observational skills, honed through years of special operations, proved invaluable in their research. James found himself sharing insights about bear behavior that combined his combat experience with his newfound appreciation for these powerful animals. His detailed accounts of the mother bear's decision-making process that night helped researchers better understand ursine intelligence and adaptability. Local schools began inviting him to share his story, though he accepted rarely and spoke carefully. He emphasized the importance of maintaining safe distances from wildlife, while acknowledging that extraordinary circumstances sometimes required extraordinary responses. The children were particularly fascinated by how he'd used his military training in an unexpected way, and their questions often gave him new perspectives on his experience. As his reputation grew, James remained grounded in his daily routines. He maintained his cabin with the same military precision, but now included considerations for wildlife in his preparations. The storage room where the bears had sheltered became a dedicated space for emergency situations, stocked with supplies that could help both humans and animals in distress. His fellow veterans sometimes joked that he was running a wilderness tactical aid station. The encounter had also affected how James processed his combat memories. The mother bear's desperate courage in protecting her cubs reminded him of civilians he'd helped evacuate from war zones, parents willing to trust traditional enemies when their children's lives were at stake. These parallels helped him find new meaning in his military service, seeing it as part of a larger pattern of protecting life rather than just engaging in conflict. During particularly harsh weather, James would sometimes find other animals seeking shelter near his cabin, deer huddling against his walls, elk sheltering in his equipment shed. While he never again attempted anything as dramatic as the bear rescue, he found small ways to help wildlife survive extreme conditions. His military training in risk assessment helped him determine when intervention was necessary and when nature should be allowed to take its course. The mother bear's trust in him that night had challenged everything he thought he knew about wild animals. Her ability to overcome her natural fear of humans in order to save her cubs demonstrated a level of intelligence and emotional complexity that many people overlooked in wildlife. James began advocating for better understanding between humans and animals, particularly in areas where development was encroaching on wild spaces. His satellite phone, once used primarily for monthly check-ins, became a link to a growing network of veterans and wildlife experts who shared his interest in conservation. They exchanged stories and strategies, developing new approaches to human-wildlife conflict that drew on their military experience. James found himself part of a community that understood both the tactical and compassionate aspects of his midnight decision. The following spring, as he worked in his garden, James heard a familiar sound, the deep huffing of a mother bear. Looking up, he saw a large female with 2 cubs watching from the tree line. While he couldn't be certain it was the same family, something in the bear's gaze reminded him of that desperate night. She watched him for a long moment before leading her cubs away, comfortable enough in his presence to allow this brief encounter. That sighting sparked a new project. James began documenting bear movements in the area, creating detailed maps that showed their travel patterns and denning sites. His military training in terrain analysis proved perfect for this task. The resulting data helped local authorities better manage human-wildlife interactions and protect critical bear habitat. As years passed, the story of that winter night became part of local legend, but James kept the fuller truth in his journals. He recorded not just the dramatic rescue, but the smaller moments. The way the cubs had played as they recovered, the mother bear's careful attention to her smallest cub, the gradual transformation of fear into trust. These details, he believed, held important lessons about survival, compassion, and the connections between all living things. Other veterans who sought solitude in the wilderness began approaching their isolation differently after hearing his story. They saw how their military training could serve purposes beyond self-protection, how the skills they'd learned in war could be adapted to preserve life rather than take it. Some began their own conservation projects, creating a network of veteran-led environmental initiatives. The experience had taught James that true strength often meant knowing when to set aside tactical doctrine in favor of moral imperatives. His military training had given him the skills to survive in the wilderness, but that night with the bears had taught him why survival mattered. It wasn't just about maintaining one's own existence, but about recognizing and protecting the vital connections that bound all living creatures together. Looking back, James realized that his most important tactical decision that night hadn't been about how to help the bears, but about choosing to help at all. In crossing the line between human and wildlife, between military protocol and compassionate action, he had discovered a deeper truth about survival. Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage involved setting aside everything you'd been taught in order to do what you knew was right. The mother bear's example had demonstrated something that James's military training had touched on but never fully explored: the universal nature of parental courage. He recognized in her actions that night the same desperate determination he'd seen in civilian parents in war zones, willing to trust traditional enemies when their children's survival was at stake. This parallel helped him process some of his combat experiences in a new light, finding healing in unexpected places. His connection to the local wildlife deepened as seasons passed. Though he maintained appropriate distances, James developed an almost intuitive sense of the animal's patterns and needs. His military observational skills, once used to detect enemy movements, now helped him anticipate and prevent human-wildlife conflicts. Local rangers began consulting him about bear behavior, particularly in situations where mothers with cubs were involved. The storage room where the bears had sheltered became something of a symbol for James. He maintained it with particular care, keeping it ready for any similar emergencies. Though he never expected to repeat that night's events, the space served as a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful acts of courage required setting aside established protocols. Other veterans who visited often spent time there, sensing the significance of what had transpired within those walls. Summer brought new opportunities for James to share his experience with others who might benefit from it. He began working with a program that helped combat veterans transition to civilian life through wilderness experiences. His story of the bears resonated deeply with these men and women who, like him, had struggled to reconcile their military training with their capacity for compassion. In the bears' story, they found a path toward healing their own emotional wounds. The smallest cub's survival had particularly affected James. Its remarkable recovery from near death seemed to parallel his own journey from combat trauma to finding peace in the wilderness. He often spoke of this to the veterans he mentored, using the cubs' resilience as a metaphor for their own capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The story helped them see their military experience not as a barrier to connection, but as a unique lens through which to view the world. James's journal entries from that period revealed a man gradually discovering new dimensions to his military training. His tactical skills, rather than separating him from the natural world, gave him unique insights into wildlife behavior. He began documenting patterns in bear movement that reminded him of patrol routes, noting how mother bears selected den sites using criteria similar to choosing defensive positions in combat. The local community's attitude toward wildlife slowly shifted as James's story spread. People began seeing bears not just as potential threats, but as intelligent creatures capable of complex decision-making and emotional bonds. His detailed observations of the mother bear's behavior that night, recorded with military precision, provided valuable insights into ursine psychology under extreme stress. During particularly harsh weather, James found himself watching the tree, Line more carefully, alert for any animals in distress. While he never again faced a situation as dramatic as that winter night, he found small ways to help wildlife survive extreme conditions. His military training in risk assessment helped him determine when intervention was necessary and when nature should be allowed to take its course. The experience had also changed how James approached his own survival preparations. While he maintained his military discipline in keeping his cabin ready for emergencies, he now included considerations for wildlife in his plans. His storage room became equipped with supplies that could serve both human and animal needs in crisis situations. Fellow veterans sometimes teased him about running a wilderness combat medical station. As his story reached wider audiences, James found himself drawn into conservation efforts. His unique perspective, combining military tactical training with deep empathy for wildlife, proved valuable in discussions about human-wildlife conflict resolution. He began advocating for better understanding between humans and animals, particularly in areas where development was encroaching on wild spaces. The mother bear's trust in him that night had challenged everything he thought he knew about wild animals. Her ability to overcome her natural fear of humans in order to save her cubs demonstrated a level of intelligence and emotional complexity that many people overlooked in wildlife. James started documenting similar instances of remarkable animal behavior, creating a record that helped others understand the depth of wildlife consciousness. His satellite phone, once used primarily for monthly check-ins, became a link to a growing network of veterans and wildlife experts who shared his interest. In conservation, they exchanged stories and strategies, developing new approaches to human-wildlife conflict that drew on their military experience. James found himself part of a community that understood both the tactical and compassionate aspects of his midnight decision. Spring brought new life to the mountain, and with it came a familiar visitor. A large female bear with 3 cubs appeared at the edge of his clearing one morning. While he couldn't be certain it was the same family, something in the bear's confident yet peaceful demeanor suggested a connection. She watched him for a long moment before leading her cubs away, comfortable enough in his presence to allow this brief encounter. That sighting inspired James to begin a new project. Using his military training in terrain analysis, he started mapping bear movement patterns in the area. His detailed documentation helped local authorities better understand and protect critical bear habitat. Other veterans joined his effort, finding purpose in applying their tactical skills to wildlife conservation. As years passed, James's story became part of local legend, but he kept the fuller truth in his journals. He recorded not just the dramatic rescue, but the smaller moments, the way the cubs had played as they recovered, the mother bear's careful attention to her smallest cub, the gradual transformation of fear into trust. These details, he believed, held important lessons about survival, compassion, and the connections between all living things. The impact of that winter night extended far beyond the immediate rescue. Other veterans who sought solitude in the wilderness began approaching their isolation differently after hearing his story. They saw how their military training could serve purposes beyond self-protection, how the skills they'd learned in war could be adapted to preserve life rather than take it. Some began their own conservation projects, creating a network of veteran-led environmental initiatives. James's experience had demonstrated that true strength often meant knowing when to set aside tactical doctrine in favor of moral imperatives. His military training had given him the skills to survive in the wilderness, but that night, with the bears, had taught him why survival mattered. It wasn't just about maintaining one's own existence, but about recognizing and protecting the vital connections that bound all living creatures together. The mountains had changed James in ways he never expected when he first sought solitude there. The same precision and discipline that had served him in combat now found expression in protecting and understanding the wildlife around him. His hypervigilance, once focused solely on detecting threats, had evolved into a deeper awareness of the natural world's complex relationships. Looking back, James realized that his most important tactical decision that night hadn't been about how to help the bears, but about choosing to help at all. In crossing the line between human and wildlife, between military protocol and compassionate action, he had discovered a deeper truth about survival. Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage involve setting aside everything you'd been taught in order to do what you knew was right. If this extraordinary tale of compassion and survival touched your heart, don't miss out on more incredible stories of veterans finding healing through wildlife encounters. Subscribe to our channel now by clicking the button below and join our growing community of nature enthusiasts and military veterans. Turn on notifications to receive alerts about new stories that showcase the remarkable connections between humans and wildlife. Every week we bring you authentic, heartwarming tales that remind us of our shared bond with nature. Remember, your subscription helps us continue sharing these remarkable stories that bridge the gap between military experience and wildlife conservation. Hit subscribe now and become part of our journey, exploring the most touching moments between veterans and wildlife. The ripple effects of James's extraordinary encounter with the bear family continued to influence the mountain community long after that winter night. His story reached a wildlife filmmaker who had served in the same Special Forces unit, and together they began documenting similar cases of veterans finding healing through wildlife conservation. Their work highlighted how military skills could be repurposed for environmental protection, creating a new narrative about the transition from warrior to guardian. James's cabin became a gathering point for an unusual combination of visitors. Wildlife biologists studying bear behavior, veterans seeking a new purpose, and conservationists interested in bridging the gap between military expertise and environmental protection. The storage room where the bears had sheltered remained a powerful symbol, its walls now covered with photographs documenting various wildlife encounters and rescue operations conducted by veterans in the area. The smallest cub's survival story particularly resonated with wounded veterans. Its journey from the brink of death to full recovery paralleled their own struggles with physical and emotional trauma. James began incorporating the bear's story into wilderness therapy sessions, showing how nature's resilience could mirror their own healing process. The image of the tiny cub fighting against impossible odds became a metaphor for personal recovery. Local authorities eventually established a unique program under James's guidance, combining veteran outreach with wildlife protection. His military experience proved invaluable in creating protocols for emergency wildlife response that balanced human safety with animal welfare. The program became a model for other mountain communities facing similar challenges with human-wildlife interaction. Spring brought unexpected developments as James discovered signs of increased bear activity near his cabin. Using his tactical tracking skills, he identified several new den sites in the area, suggesting that the bears felt secure in his presence. His detailed documentation of their behavior patterns helped researchers understand how bears adapted to human proximity when they felt unthreatened. The mother bear's decision that night had challenged conventional wisdom about wildlife behavior. James worked with behavioral scientists to analyze the factors that had led to her trusting him, despite her natural instincts. Their findings suggested that animals could discern human intent more accurately than previously believed, especially in life-or-death situations. Years of combat had taught James to read subtle signs of threat or alliance, and he now applied these skills to wildlife observation. He began identifying patterns in animal behavior that indicated their comfort levels with human presence. This information proved valuable for park rangers managing wilderness areas where humans and wildlife intersected. The transformation of military hypervigilance into environmental awareness became a recurring theme in James's work with other veterans. He showed them how the same alertness that had kept them alive in combat could help them connect with and protect the natural world. Many found that this redirection of their tactical skills provided a sense of purpose they had been missing since leaving service. As his reputation grew, James was invited to speak at military transition programs about his experience. He emphasized how the disciplined observation skills learned in special operations could be valuable in wildlife conservation. His story offered a new perspective on post-service life, showing how military training could serve peaceful purposes. The storage room evolved into a kind of informal museum, documenting not just the bear rescue, but other instances of veteran wildlife interaction. Photos, journals, and maps covered the walls, telling stories of soldiers who had found healing through their connection with nature. The space became a powerful testimony to the possibility of transformation from warrior to environmental guardian. Weather. Patterns in the mountains grew more extreme, creating more situations where wildlife needed human intervention to survive. James's example inspired other veterans to establish similar outposts, creating a network of wilderness observers who could respond to animals in distress. Their military training proved invaluable in coordinating emergency responses during severe weather events. The story of that winter night continued to evolve as others added their own experiences to the narrative. Veterans who had found similar moments of connection with wildlife shared their stories, creating a rich tapestry of experiences that challenged traditional boundaries between humans and animals. These accounts helped reshape public perception of both veterans and wildlife. James's journals from this period revealed deeper insights into the parallel between military service and wildlife protection. He wrote about how both required intense focus, split-second decision-making, and the ability to read subtle environmental cues. His observations helped other veterans see how their military skills could be redirected toward conservation efforts. The smallest of the three cubs had left tracks that spring that showed it had grown into a healthy adult bear. James recognized its prints by a distinctive pattern caused by an injury it had sustained during that frozen night. Watching its recovery and growth had given him hope for his own healing process, showing how near-death experiences could lead to renewed strength. Local schools began incorporating James's story into their environmental education programs, using it to teach children about wildlife behavior and conservation. The tale of the veteran and the bears became a way to discuss larger themes of compassion, courage, and the responsibility humans had toward the natural world. The mother bear's trust in him that night had demonstrated something profound about the capacity for cross-species understanding. James worked with researchers to document other instances where animals had shown similar ability to discern human intent. Their findings suggested that the boundaries between human and animal consciousness were more permeable than previously. He thought his military training had taught him to maintain emotional distance, but the bear encounter had shown him the value of controlled empathy. James began teaching other veterans how to balance tactical awareness with compassion, creating a new approach to wildlife interaction that drew on both military discipline and emotional intelligence. The mountains themselves seemed different after that night, as if the barrier between human and wild spaces had somehow softened. James noticed more frequent peaceful encounters between humans and wildlife in the area, suggesting that animals could sense the change in human attitude. His documentation of these interactions provided valuable data for researchers studying human-wildlife coexistence. If this remarkable journey of transformation speaks to your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Join our community where we share powerful stories of veterans finding healing through nature. Click the notification bell to never miss our weekly uploads, featuring extraordinary encounters between military veterans and wildlife. Your subscription supports our mission to bridge the gap between those who served and the natural world that helps them heal. Hit subscribe now and become part of this inspiring journey of discovery and renewal. The scientific community's interest in James's bear encounter led to broader studies of veteran wildlife interactions. Researchers from major universities began documenting how military training could provide unique insights into animal behavior. James's precise observational skills and tactical understanding offered new perspectives on wildlife psychology that traditional researchers had overlooked. A documentary filmmaker, herself a former combat medic, spent a year following James and other veterans involved in wildlife conservation. Her footage captured remarkable moments of connection between former soldiers and the animals they now protected. The resulting film challenged public perceptions of both veterans and wildlife, showing how shared experiences of trauma and survival could create unexpected bonds. The success of James's veteran wildlife program attracted attention from military transition specialists nationwide. They recognized that his approach offered a unique path for veterans struggling to find purpose in civilian life. The combination of tactical skills and conservation work provided a natural bridge between military service and environmental protection. Behavioral. Scientists studying the mother bear's decision that night identified patterns that suggested higher levels of cognitive processing than previously attributed to wildlife. Their research showed how extreme circumstances could override instinctive behaviors, leading to sophisticated decision-making that challenged traditional understanding of animal intelligence. James's detailed documentation of the bear family's recovery became a valuable resource for wildlife rehabilitation experts. His military training in observing and recording precise details provided insights into how large predators responded to human intervention. These observations helped develop new protocols for wildlife rescue operations. The storage room's transformation continued as more veterans contributed their stories and experiences. The walls became covered with maps tracking wildlife movements, photographs of successful interventions, and journals documenting moments of connection between soldiers and animals. Each item told a story of healing and purpose found in unexpected places. Environmental organizations began incorporating veteran expertise into their conservation programs. They discovered that military experience in terrain analysis, tactical planning, and crisis response translated effectively to wildlife protection. James's example showed how combat skills could be repurposed for environmental preservation. The mountain community's relationship with its wildlife population evolved as more veterans joined the conservation effort. Bear encounters became opportunities for observation rather than conflict, with former soldiers using their training to maintain safe boundaries while protecting animal habitats. Their presence created a unique balance between human and wildlife interests. James's work with traumatized veterans revealed parallels between combat stress and wildlife behavior under pressure. His understanding of both worlds helped bridge the gap between human and animal responses to threat. This insight proved valuable in developing approaches to wildlife management that respected natural behaviors while ensuring human safety. The smallest cub survival story became a centerpiece of veteran rehabilitation programs. Its journey from near-death to thriving adult resonated with soldiers recovering from physical and psychological wounds. The bear's resilience offered hope and inspiration to those struggling with their own healing processes. Research teams studying the long-term effects of climate change on wildlife behavior consulted James about adaptation strategies. His military experience in rapid response planning helped develop protocols for protecting vulnerable animal populations during extreme weather events. The intersection of tactical thinking and environmental conservation opened new approaches to wildlife protection. Local educational programs evolved to include veteran-led wilderness experiences for youth. Children learned about wildlife behavior through the unique perspective of former soldiers, gaining understanding of both natural systems and military service. These programs helped build community support for conservation efforts while honoring veteran contributions. The mother bear's choice to trust human help that desperate night continued to influence scientific understanding of animal cognition. Researchers documented similar cases where wildlife demonstrated unexpected levels of trust in humans during crisis situations. These findings suggested more complex decision-making abilities in animals than previously recognized. James's journals from this period reflected deeper insights into the nature of survival and adaptation. His military training in pattern recognition helped identify subtle changes in wildlife behavior as environmental conditions shifted. These observations contributed to broader studies of how animals adjusted to changing climatic conditions. The wilderness therapy programs James developed for veterans expanded to include family members affected by combat trauma. The healing power of wildlife encounters proved beneficial for military families struggling to reconnect after deployment. The shared experience of observing and protecting animals created new bonds between family members. Scientific studies of the storage room's microclimate during the bear family's recovery provided insights into optimal conditions for wildlife rehabilitation. James's military attention to environmental control had inadvertently created an ideal space for animal recovery. These findings influenced the design of wildlife rehabilitation facilities nationwide. The unique combination of military precision and wildlife empathy that James demonstrated inspired a new generation of conservation leaders. Young veterans saw how their service skills could contribute to environmental protection. The integration of tactical thinking with conservation work created more effective approaches to wildlife preservation. Behavioral experts studied how James's military communication skills had influenced the mother bear's response. His calm, deliberate movements and steady voice had seemingly conveyed non-threatening intent across species barriers. This research contributed to improved protocols for wildlife intervention situations. As climate extremes intensified, James's example of balancing tactical response with compassionate action became increasingly relevant. Other veterans established similar wildlife monitoring stations across remote areas, creating a network of observation posts staffed by former military personnel. Their presence provided early warning systems for wildlife populations facing environmental threats. The story of that winter night continued to yield new insights into the complexity of human-wildlife relationships. Each retelling revealed additional layers of understanding about how military experience could inform conservation efforts. The ongoing impact of James's decision demonstrated how single acts of courage could inspire lasting change. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary stories of courage, compassion, and connection between veterans and wildlife. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest uploads, featuring remarkable encounters that bridge the gap between military service and environmental protection. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of healing and purpose found in nature. Join our community now and be part of this inspiring journey of discovery and transformation. The influence of James's bear encounter extended into unexpected areas of scientific research. Neuroscientists began studying the unique brain patterns of veterans who had successfully transitioned from combat awareness to wildlife observation. Their findings suggested that military hypervigilance could be positively channeled into environmental protection, creating new pathways for healing trauma. International conservation organizations took notice of the veteran wildlife protection model. Delegations from countries facing similar human-wildlife conflicts visited James's mountain community to learn how military expertise could enhance conservation efforts. The program's success led to the establishment of similar initiatives in wilderness areas worldwide. Studies of the mother bear's behavior that night sparked new theories about animal intelligence in crisis situations. Cognitive researchers identified patterns suggesting that bears could make complex risk assessments based on subtle human cues. The data collected from James's detailed observations contributed to a deeper understanding of ursine decision-making processes. James developed specialized training programs combining military tactical skills with wildlife protection techniques. His methods helped veterans transfer their combat experience into environmental conservation while processing their war experiences. The program's success rate in both wildlife protection and veteran rehabilitation attracted attention from military transition specialists worldwide. The storage room's environmental data provided valuable insights into optimal conditions for wildlife recovery. Engineering teams studied how James's military precision in maintaining the space had created an ideal rehabilitation environment. Their findings influenced the design of wildlife recovery facilities across multiple climate zones. Remote sensing experts collaborated with veteran observers to create new wildlife monitoring systems. Their combined expertise in surveillance and animal behavior patterns led to more effective tracking of endangered species. The integration of military technology with conservation needs open new frontiers in wildlife protection. Long-term studies of the bear family's den site revealed interesting adaptations to human presence. Researchers noted how the mother bear had modified her territory to maintain a safe distance while staying within range of potential assistance. This behavioral adaptation challenged traditional understanding of wildlife boundaries. The psychological impact of the bear rescue experience spread through the veteran community. Former soldiers found that applying their tactical skills to wildlife protection helped them process combat memories in new ways. The combination of military discipline and environmental stewardship created powerful healing opportunities. James's documentation methods evolved into standardized protocols for wildlife intervention. His military background in after-action reporting helped create comprehensive systems for recording and analyzing animal rescue operations. These protocols improved the success rate of wildlife rehabilitation efforts across various species. Climate. Scientists incorporated veteran observation posts into their research networks. The military precision in weather monitoring and wildlife behavior documentation provided valuable data about animal adaptation to environmental changes. This collaboration enhanced understanding of climate impact on wildlife populations. Educational. Institutions developed programs combining military expertise with environmental science. Veterans shared their unique perspectives on wilderness survival and animal behavior with students studying conservation biology. This integration of practical experience with academic knowledge created more effective approaches to wildlife protection. The mother bear's trust in human intervention during crisis became a focal point for research into animal consciousness. Behavioral scientists studied similar instances where wildlife demonstrated unexpected levels of species cooperation. These findings suggested more complex decision-making abilities in animals than previously recognized. James's work with traumatized animals revealed parallels with combat stress recovery. His understanding of both military and wildlife trauma helped develop new approaches to animal rehabilitation. The techniques proved especially effective with animals displaced by environmental disasters. The success of veteran-led wildlife initiatives influenced public policy on wilderness management. Government agencies began incorporating military expertise into their conservation planning. The combination of tactical thinking and environmental protection created more effective approaches to human-wildlife conflict resolution. The smallest. Cub's recovery story continued inspiring rehabilitation programs worldwide. Its journey from near death to survival became a powerful metaphor for overcoming trauma. Wildlife centers adopted similar recovery protocols based on James's careful documentation of the cub's progression. International research teams studied how military training enhanced wildlife observation capabilities. The veterans' ability to detect subtle behavioral changes and anticipate animal movements proved valuable in conservation efforts. Their skills contributed to better understanding of wildlife adaptation patterns. The mountain community's transformation into a model of human-wildlife coexistence attracted attention from urban planners. Cities facing increased wildlife encounters sought guidance from James's veteran-led program. The successful integration of military expertise with conservation needs provided templates for managing human-wildlife interactions. James's approach to wildlife protection influenced disaster response planning. His military experience in crisis management helped develop protocols for protecting animal populations during natural disasters. The combination of tactical thinking and conservation expertise improved emergency wildlife response capabilities. Environmental protection agencies began recruiting veterans for sensitive wildlife monitoring missions. Their military background proved valuable in tracking poachers and protecting endangered species. The integration of combat skills with conservation work created more effective wildlife protection programs. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about veterans finding healing and purpose through wildlife conservation. Click the notification bell to receive alerts about new videos featuring extraordinary encounters between former soldiers and the animals they protect. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of transformation and hope. Join our growing community and be part of this amazing journey where military service meets wildlife preservation. Advances in wildlife monitoring technology, merged with veteran expertise, created unprecedented opportunities for studying animal behavior. James collaborated with tech developers to design observation systems that incorporated military surveillance principles while respecting wildlife boundaries. These innovations revolutionized how researchers gathered data on animal populations in extreme conditions. The therapeutic impact of wildlife conservation work on veterans led to groundbreaking studies in trauma recovery. Medical researchers documented how the combination of tactical skills application and animal interaction produced unique healing patterns in former soldiers. Brain imaging revealed positive changes in areas typically affected by combat stress when veterans engaged in wildlife protection activities. Native American tribes in the region sought James's guidance in combining traditional ecological knowledge with veteran-led conservation approaches. Their ancestral understanding of human-wildlife relationships complemented the tactical precision of military training. This cultural exchange enriched both conservation practices and veteran rehabilitation programs. Universities established specialized programs studying the intersection of military expertise and wildlife biology. Graduate students worked alongside veterans to document how combat experience informed animal behavior understanding. The resulting research opened new fields of study in environmental protection and species preservation. James's detailed records of the bear family's recovery contributed to broader studies of wildlife resilience. Scientists analyzed how animals adapted to human intervention during crisis situations. The data helped develop more effective protocols for wildlife rehabilitation across different species and environments. The success of veteran wildlife programs influenced international conservation policy. Environmental protection agencies worldwide began incorporating military expertise into their strategic planning. The integration of tactical thinking with preservation efforts created more comprehensive approaches to species protection. Genetic researchers tracked the bear family's bloodline through subsequent generations. Their findings suggested that the cubs' survival had contributed to maintaining genetic diversity in the local bear population. The long-term impact of that winter night extended beyond individual survival to species resilience. Climate change specialists collaborated with veteran observers to document wildlife adaptation patterns. Their combined expertise identified emerging trends in animal behavior responding to environmental shifts. The military precision in data collection enhanced scientific understanding of species survival strategies. The psychological benefits of wildlife conservation work spread through veteran support networks. Former soldiers found that applying their skills to environmental protection helped process combat experiences constructively. The combination of purpose and practical application facilitated healing in ways traditional therapy couldn't match. Professional wildlife photographers sought James's guidance in approaching animals safely. His military expertise in concealment and movement helped them capture unprecedented images of natural behavior. The resulting documentation contributed to public understanding of wildlife intelligence and social structures. Engineering teams studied the design elements of James's storage room that had enabled the bear's recovery. Their analysis led to innovations in wildlife rehabilitation facility construction. The integration of military environmental control principles improved survival rates for injured and stressed animals. The mountain community's transformation into a wildlife conservation hub attracted international attention. Environmental organizations established research centers combining veteran expertise with scientific study. The successful model of human-wildlife coexistence provided templates for similar initiatives worldwide. Neurological studies of veteran observers revealed enhanced pattern recognition abilities when tracking wildlife. Their military training in threat assessment translated effectively to identifying subtle changes in animal behavior. These findings contributed to better understanding of both human cognitive adaptation and wildlife psychology. James developed specialized training programs teaching veterans to apply combat observation skills to wildlife protection. The courses combined tactical expertise with environmental awareness, creating new career paths for former soldiers. Graduates established similar programs across different ecological zones, expanding the network of veteran conservationists. The mother bear's decision-making process during the crisis became a focus of cognitive research. Scientists studied how extreme circumstances influenced animal intelligence and trust formation. The documentation of that night contributed to evolving theories about consciousness in wildlife. Remote sensing specialists worked with veteran observers to create advanced wildlife monitoring systems. Their combined expertise in surveillance and animal behavior patterns enhanced protection of endangered species. The technology incorporated military precision while maintaining respectful distances. From Wildlife. Educational institutions developed curriculum combining military tactical training with environmental science. Students learned to apply strategic thinking to conservation challenges while understanding ecosystem relationships. The programs created new generations of wildlife protectors informed by veteran experience. Local indigenous communities shared traditional knowledge about bear behavior with veteran observers. The combination of ancestral wisdom and military precision enhanced understanding of wildlife patterns. This collaborative approach enriched both scientific research and conservation practices. The impact of veteran-led wildlife protection extended into policy development for public lands. Government agencies incorporated military expertise into wilderness management strategies. The success of these programs led to expanded opportunities for veterans in environmental conservation. We encourage you to share your thoughts on this remarkable transformation from combat veteran to wildlife guardian. Join our growing community by subscribing to discover more extraordinary stories of healing and purpose found in nature. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives of veterans finding new missions in wildlife conservation. Click subscribe and activate notifications to stay connected with our weekly releases, showcasing the unique bond between military experience and environmental protection. The integration of veteran expertise with artificial intelligence systems created new possibilities in wildlife protection. James collaborated with computer scientists to develop predictive models, incorporating military tactical analysis with animal behavior patterns. These AI systems learned from veterans' observational data to anticipate wildlife movements during extreme weather conditions. Diplomatic missions from countries experiencing human-wildlife conflicts sought guidance from the Veteran Conservation Program. James's approach to combining military precision with environmental protection provided templates for international wildlife management. The successful model demonstrated how former soldiers could contribute to global conservation efforts. Medical researchers discovered unique neurological patterns in veterans who transitioned to wildlife observation. Brain imaging studies showed how tactical awareness skills, adapted to animal behavior monitoring, created new neural pathways. This research provided insights into both trauma recovery and human-wildlife relationships. The mother bear's decision process during the crisis became a cornerstone of animal cognition studies. Behavioral scientists analyzed how extreme circumstances influence trust formation between species. The detailed documentation of that night contributed to evolving theories about wildlife intelligence and emotional capacity. Environmental protection agencies incorporated veteran tactical training into their ranger programs. The combination of military expertise and conservation work enhanced wilderness management capabilities. Former soldiers found new purpose applying their skills to protecting endangered species and habitats. Indigenous communities across North America shared traditional knowledge about bear behavior with veteran observers. The synthesis of ancestral wisdom and military precision created more comprehensive understanding of wildlife patterns. This collaborative approach enriched both scientific research and practical conservation efforts. Advanced monitoring systems, developed by veteran observers, revolutionized wildlife protection technology. Their experience in surveillance and threat assessment improved tracking of endangered species while maintaining respectful distances. The integration of military expertise with conservation needs produced more effective protection strategies. Universities established research centers studying the relationship between combat experience and wildlife conservation. Graduate programs combine military tactical training with environmental science, creating new approaches to species protection. Students learn to apply strategic thinking to conservation challenges while understanding ecosystem relationships. The psychological benefits of wildlife work spread through veteran support networks worldwide. Former soldiers discovered that applying their skills to environmental protection aided in processing combat experiences. The combination of purpose and practical application facilitated healing in ways traditional therapy couldn't achieve. Climate scientists collaborated with veteran observers to document wildlife adaptation to environmental changes. Their combined expertise identified emerging patterns in animal behavior responding to habitat shifts. The military precision in data collection enhanced understanding of species survival strategies. Engineering teams studied how James's military background influenced his approach to wildlife rehabilitation spaces. Their analysis led to innovations in facility design, incorporating tactical environmental control principles. These improvements increased survival rates for injured and stressed animals across various species. Remote sensing specialists worked with veteran observers to develop advanced wildlife monitoring systems. Their expertise in surveillance and animal behavior patterns enhanced protection of endangered species. The technology incorporated military precision while respecting wildlife boundaries. Neurological research revealed how veteran observers developed enhanced pattern recognition abilities in wildlife tracking. Their combat training in threat assessment translated effectively to identifying subtle changes in animal behavior. These findings contributed to better understanding of both human cognitive adaptation and wildlife psychology. The mountain community's transformation into a wildlife conservation hub attracted international attention. Environmental organizations established research centers combining veteran expertise with scientific study. The successful model of human-wildlife coexistence provided templates for similar initiatives worldwide. James developed specialized training programs teaching veterans to apply combat observation skills to wildlife protection. The courses combined tactical expertise with environmental awareness, creating new career paths for former soldiers. Graduates established similar programs across different ecological zones, expanding the network of veteran conservationists. Professional wildlife photographers benefited from veteran guidance in approaching animals safely. Military expertise in concealment and movement helped capture unprecedented images of natural behavior. The resulting documentation contributed to public understanding of wildlife intelligence and social structures. Genetic researchers continued, tracking the bear family's bloodline through subsequent generations. Their findings suggested that the cub's survival had contributed to maintaining genetic diversity in the local bear population. The long-term impact of that winter night extended beyond individual survival to species resilience. Native American tribes in the region sought James's guidance in combining traditional ecological knowledge with veteran-led conservation approaches. Their ancestral understanding of human-wildlife relationships complemented the tactical precision of military training. This cultural exchange enriched both conservation practices and veteran rehabilitation programs. The success of veteran wildlife programs influenced international conservation policy. Environmental protection agencies worldwide began incorporating military expertise into their strategic planning. The integration of tactical thinking with preservation efforts created more comprehensive approaches to species protection. The transformation of military hypervigilance into environmental awareness became a model for veteran rehabilitation programs. Former soldiers learned to channel combat-honed observational skills into wildlife protection. This redirection of military expertise provided a powerful path for post-service recovery, Remember to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about veterans finding healing and purpose through wildlife conservation. Click the notification bell to receive alerts about new videos featuring extraordinary encounters between former soldiers and the animals they protect. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of transformation and hope. Join our growing community and be part of this amazing journey where military service meets wildlife preservation. Satellite technology integration with veteran wildlife monitoring created unprecedented opportunities for species protection. Advanced imaging systems, combined with military expertise in surveillance, enabled researchers to track animal populations across vast wilderness areas while minimizing human interference. James's program became a testing ground for these innovations. In conservation technology, the therapeutic applications of wildlife conservation work expanded into specialized programs for military families. Spouses and children of veterans found healing through participating in animal observation and protection activities. The shared experience of connecting with wildlife helped rebuild family bonds strained by military service and trauma. Biomedical researchers studied the physiological changes in veterans who transitioned to wildlife conservation work. Their findings revealed significant improvements in stress hormone levels and immune system function. The combination of tactical skill application and animal interaction produced measurable health benefits beyond psychological healing. International conservation organizations developed training centers based on James's Veteran Wildlife Program model. Former military personnel from various nations brought their expertise to environmental protection efforts. The global network of veteran conservationists enhanced cross-border cooperation in wildlife preservation. Educational institutions incorporated the lessons from James's bear encounter into comprehensive wilderness management curricula. Students learned how military tactical assessment could inform wildlife rescue decisions. The integration of combat experience with conservation principles created new approaches to human-wildlife conflict resolution. The mother bear's trust response became central to studies of interspecies communication during crisis situations. Researchers analyzed how extreme circumstances could override instinctive fear responses in wildlife. This research contributed to improved protocols for emergency wildlife intervention. Virtual reality developers collaborated with veteran observers to create immersive training programs for wildlife conservation. The simulations incorporated military precision in movement and observation techniques. These training tools helped prepare new generations of conservation workers for field operations. The psychological resilience demonstrated by the smallest cub inspired new approaches to wildlife rehabilitation. Veterinary specialists studied how young animals recovered from severe trauma. The findings influenced treatment protocols for wildlife affected by environmental disasters. Engineering advances in wildlife monitoring equipment benefited from veteran input on durability and functionality. Military experience in harsh conditions informed the design of more reliable conservation tools. The resulting technology enhanced researchers' ability to study wildlife behavior in extreme environments. Climate scientists integrated veteran observation posts into global environmental monitoring networks. The military precision in weather pattern documentation provided valuable data about wildlife adaptation. This collaboration enhanced understanding of how animal populations responded to climate change. Native healing traditions combined with veteran conservation work created innovative trauma recovery programs. Indigenous wisdom about human-wildlife relationships complemented military tactical skills. The synthesis of these approaches provided powerful healing opportunities for former soldiers. Neurological studies revealed how wildlife observation activated similar brain regions to combat awareness. Veterans' tactical scanning abilities transferred effectively to animal behavior monitoring. This research helped explain the therapeutic benefits of conservation work for former military personnel. Remote sensing technology evolved through collaboration between veterans and wildlife scientists. Military expertise in surveillance enhanced the accuracy of animal population tracking. The resulting systems provided better data while maintaining respectful distances from wildlife. James developed advanced training modules incorporating combat experience into wildlife protection strategies. Former soldiers learned to apply tactical skills to conservation challenges. The program's success led to its adoption by environmental organizations worldwide. Genetic diversity studies of the local bear population revealed the long-term impact of saving the mother and cubs. Their survival had contributed to maintaining healthy bloodlines in the region. Researchers tracked these genetic benefits through subsequent generations of bears. Environmental protection agencies incorporated veteran expertise into disaster response planning. Military experience in crisis management enhanced wildlife rescue capabilities. The combination of tactical thinking and conservation knowledge improved emergency response effectiveness. Professional conservationists studied how veteran-led programs influenced wildlife behavior patterns. Animals in areas monitored by former soldiers showed less stress response to human presence. This research suggested that military precision in movement and observation created less environmental disruption. University research teams analyzed the unique aspects of veteran wildlife interaction. Their findings revealed how military training enhanced conservation effectiveness. The study results influenced the development of new environmental protection strategies. The transformation of combat skills into conservation tools became a model for military transition programs. Veterans discovered how their tactical abilities served environmental protection. This repurposing of military expertise provided meaningful post-service careers. Remember to join our growing community by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. Your support helps us share more inspiring stories of veterans finding new purpose through wildlife conservation. Together, we can spread awareness of how military experience enriches environmental protection efforts. Subscribe now to be part of this remarkable journey connecting combat veterans with wildlife preservation. Quantum technology applications emerged in veteran-led wildlife conservation efforts, creating unprecedented opportunities for understanding animal behavior. Advanced sensors developed with military precision enabled researchers to track subtle changes in wildlife movement patterns while maintaining minimal environmental impact. James's program became a testing ground for these groundbreaking innovations in conservation science. Aerospace engineers collaborated with veteran observers to develop specialized drones for wildlife monitoring. Their military experience in aerial surveillance informed the design of quieter, less intrusive observation platforms. These technological advances revolutionized how researchers studied animal populations in remote areas. The therapeutic impact of wildlife conservation expanded into pioneering programs for military medical recovery. Wounded veterans discovered that working with animals accelerated both physical and psychological healing. The combination of purposeful activity and natural environment created optimal conditions for rehabilitation. Specialized artificial intelligence systems learned from veteran observational techniques to enhance wildlife protection. Machine learning algorithms incorporated military tactical assessment principles into conservation planning. This fusion of human experience and technology improved prediction of animal behavior during environmental crises. International space. Agencies integrated veteran wildlife monitoring stations into global climate research networks. Their precision in documenting environmental changes provided valuable data about ecosystem adaptation. The resulting collaboration enhanced understanding of worldwide wildlife response to habitat transformation. Biochemical research revealed unique molecular changes in veterans who transitioned to conservation work. Scientists identified positive alterations in stress-related hormones and neural transmitters. These findings supported the development of new approaches to treating combat-related trauma. Virtual environment designers worked with veteran conservationists to create immersive training simulations. The programs incorporated military tactics into wildlife observation techniques. These advanced training tools prepared conservation workers for complex field operations. The mother bear's behavior during the crisis inspired new studies in animal consciousness research. Cognitive scientists analyzed how extreme circumstances influence complex decision-making in wildlife. Their findings challenged traditional understanding of animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Underwater research teams applied veteran surveillance techniques to marine wildlife observation. Military expertise in aquatic operations enhanced studies of marine ecosystem dynamics. The resulting protocols improved monitoring of endangered ocean species. Quantum computing applications emerged in wildlife population tracking and prediction models. Veterans' tactical assessment principles informed the development of complex analytical systems. These technological advances enhanced researchers' ability to predict and protect wildlife movements. Bioengineering specialists studied how veteran wildlife interaction influenced cellular stress responses. Their research revealed unexpected connections between emotional healing and physical recovery. The findings contributed to new therapeutic approaches for trauma treatment. Advanced materials. Scientists developed specialized equipment for wildlife conservation based on military gear. Their innovations improved the durability and effectiveness of monitoring devices. These technological advances enhanced researchers' ability to study wildlife in extreme conditions. Indigenous knowledge systems merged with veteran tactical expertise to create holistic conservation approaches. Traditional ecological wisdom complemented military precision in wildlife protection strategies. This synthesis produced more effective and culturally sensitive conservation methods. Atmospheric scientists collaborated with veteran observers to track wildlife adaptation to climate extremes. Their combined expertise revealed patterns in animal behavior during severe weather events. These insights improved prediction and protection of vulnerable species. Nanotechnology applications in wildlife monitoring benefited from veteran input on field operations. Military experience in surveillance informed the development of microscale tracking devices. These innovations provided unprecedented detail in wildlife behavior studies. Geological research teams incorporated veteran expertise into habitat protection strategies. Military understanding of terrain analysis enhanced conservation planning. In complex environments, this collaboration improved identification and preservation of critical wildlife corridors. Renewable energy specialists worked with veteran conservationists to develop wildlife-safe power systems. Their combined expertise created solutions that protected animal populations while providing sustainable energy. These innovations demonstrated how technology could serve both human needs and wildlife preservation. Veterinary science advanced through the application of military medical experience to wildlife care. Combat medical training informed emergency response protocols for injured animals. These developments improved survival rates in wildlife rehabilitation programs. Remember to subscribe Form.io to our channel for more groundbreaking stories connecting military expertise with wildlife conservation. Click the notification bell to stay updated on our latest innovations in veteran-led environmental protection. Your support helps us continue sharing these remarkable adventures in science and conservation. Join our growing community to be part of this extraordinary journey, bridging military service and wildlife preservation. James Harper's legacy lives on through the thousands of veterans who found new purpose in wildlife conservation. His decision that winter night to help a desperate mother bear and her 3 cubs sparked a global movement, transforming how we approach both wildlife protection and veteran rehabilitation. The intersection of military expertise with environmental conservation continues to yield groundbreaking discoveries and innovative approaches to preserving our natural world. As for James, he still maintains his vigilant watch over the mountain wilderness, though now he shares his expertise with new generations of veteran conservationists. The bears he saved that night may have vanished into the forest, but their story continues to inspire hope and change worldwide. If this extraordinary tale of courage, compassion, and transformation touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of veterans finding healing through wildlife conservation. Turn on notifications to never miss our weekly uploads featuring remarkable encounters between those who served and the wildlife they now protect.